"Sir, this seat is not for you. Please move for our VIP guest." The entire first-class cabin froze. The words came from flight attendant Laura Miller, her polite smile stretched thin, but her tone laced with disdain. In front of her sat a black man, upright in seat 2A, Jonathan Pierce. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple but finely tailored grey suit, his eyes fixed on the tablet screen in his hands. He did not flare up, only lifted his head slightly, as if still processing what he had just heard. Behind Laura stood a slim white woman. Her golden hair meticulously styled, a luxury watch glinting under the cabin lights. Catherine Doyle. She tapped her wrist impatiently, her gaze brushing over Jonathan as though his presence was nothing more than a mistake that needed to be removed. "That's my seat," Catherine said, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. Her voice was not raised, yet it carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Jonathan's fingers stilled on the screen. He drew in a slow breath. All eyes turned toward him, some curious, some openly judgmental. A few passengers already had their phones raised, recording. A storm was quietly taking shape. Jonathan slipped his wallet onto the fold-out table and drew out a gleaming card. The Platinum membership card of Skylink Airlines. "This is the seat assigned to me," he said evenly, his tone calm but weighted with certainty. The smile flickered off Laura's lips. For a split second, uncertainty flashed in her eyes, but then she steadied herself, lowering her voice with a forced sweetness. "Yes, Mr. Pierce, but seat 2A is usually reserved for very special guests." Her glance slid toward Catherine, a silent message wrapped in a glance. A ripple went through the cabin. An elderly man frowned, a young woman stifled a gasp, and a couple of men in the back chuckled under their breath. "He doesn't look like someone who belongs there." Jonathan felt his heartbeat slow, the kind of calm that comes with familiarity. He had lived this moment before, familiar with skeptical stares, familiar with denial. But instead of lowering his head, he straightened in his seat. The Platinum card still lay on the table, shining as undeniable proof. Laura leaned closer, her voice lowered, though still loud enough for nearby ears. "Please cooperate, sir. We'll arrange another seat. More comfortable." "More comfortable?" Jonathan raised a brow. His gaze locked on hers, steady but sharp as a blade. "I chose this seat, and I will sit in the seat I booked." The firmness in his voice made Laura falter. Catherine let out a sharp breath, clearly irritated. She stepped forward, pretending to adjust her bag in the overhead bin, then deftly slipped a folded stack of cash into Laura's pocket. "Thank you for making this easier," Catherine murmured, just loud enough for a few passengers to hear. In an instant, Laura's cheeks flushed red. Her hand brushed the pocket instinctively, caught between conscience and temptation. The air in the cabin grew heavy. Someone's phone camera captured it all, the faint clicks of photos snapping, breaking the silence. Everyone knew they were witnessing more than a seat dispute. They were seeing prejudice, bought and sold with a handful of bills. Jonathan said nothing more. He quietly closed his tablet, leaned back, and stared straight ahead, resolute as a steel wall. Inside him, memory stirred, his father's eyes, the vow he had once made at a graveside, to make the world see each other as human beings, not as colors. Laura retreated, her face tight with unease. Catherine settled smugly into a nearby seat, a triumphant smile curling her lips. Around them, glances clashed, some filled with contempt, some with sympathy, others with helpless resignation. Phones kept recording. Social media was only a tap away. A tidal wave was about to break, one that would drag the airline into its center. For none of them knew the man they had just tried to diminish was not just a passenger. He owned 26% of Skylink Airlines. He was Jonathan Pierce, founder and CEO of Next Wave Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar empire. And in that moment, from a single first-class seat, the fate of an entire airline was about to be rewritten. The plane still trembled softly on the runway, but inside Jonathan Pierce's mind, old memories thundered back. The skeptical looks people gave him were nothing new. Yet each time, they reminded him of the harsh road he had traveled. Jonathan had not been born into privilege. He grew up in the rough neighborhoods of South Detroit, where the familiar sounds were police sirens and shouting in the night. His father, a hard-working mechanic, was killed in a street fight when Jonathan was just 16. On the day of the funeral, the thin, weary teenager stood at the graveside, his hand clenched into a fist, carving a vow into his soul. "I will make this world more just. I will force people to see each other as human beings, not as stereotypes." From that moment on, every day of Jonathan's life was a battle. He found solace in an old computer bought from a thrift store. While other kids played basketball or wasted their youth in arcades, Jonathan spent long nights teaching himself how to code. At first, it was only simple games, then more sophisticated algorithms, until finally it became the foundation of a dream. He worked 18-hour days, studying while juggling every odd job he could find, delivering pizza, waiting tables, unloading warehouses. His cramped apartment became a laboratory, lit by the dim glow of a desk lamp, where a young black man refused to let fate dictate his future. At 25, Jonathan founded Next Wave Technologies with only a few $1,000s in savings. People laughed at him, calling him the coding dreamer. But when his AI algorithms began helping businesses process customer data 10 times faster, the laughter turned into attention. From that run-down apartment, Next Wave grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire, making Jonathan one of the most influential CEOs in America. Yet even sitting in first class today, Jonathan lived simply. He was the type who carried bags for the elderly, held doors for service workers, and remembered the names of staff he met at airports, not to appear noble, but because he believed kindness was the only foundation that could make the world fair. He had chosen seat 2A on this flight for comfort, to prepare for his keynote speech at the Global Ethics and Technology Summit, where he planned to present his vision for fair and unbiased AI. The irony was sharp. In this very moment, he was living through blatant bias himself. Behind him, Catherine Doyle tapped her watch again and again, her heels clicking impatiently against the floor, as if every second Jonathan remained in that seat was a personal insult. Meanwhile, Laura Miller, an 8-year veteran flight attendant, struggled with unease. The weight of the cash Catherine had slipped into her pocket still pressed against her uniform. In her mind, two forces clashed: her professional duty to uphold the airline's image, and the temptation of money that could ease the crushing mortgage she was barely keeping up with. Her hands shook as she jotted notes in her logbook, avoiding Jonathan's gaze, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Jonathan observed it all but betrayed no emotion. He had seen this kind of inner conflict countless times, how easily people compromised their conscience for a handful of bills. He did not burn with rage, but deep inside, a resolve gathered like a storm forming far offshore. The irony ran deeper still. Skylink Airlines was already teetering on the brink of internal crisis. Outdated systems, frustrated customers, and a desperate search for a technological partner. What they did not know was that the solution they needed was sitting right in seat 2A, the very man they had just tried to push out. None of them realized that beneath his modest suit, Jonathan was Skylink's largest shareholder. Quietly, over the past 2 years, he had been buying up stock, preparing to pull the airline out of its decline. And today, instead of unveiling a grand plan, Skylink had shoved itself head first into a scandal of its own making. In that moment, Jonathan whispered only to himself, "You have just started a war, and this time I will not need code to rewrite the system. I will rewrite your destiny itself." The air in first class thickened. Some whispered, others looked away awkwardly. Yet every gaze remained fixed on seat 2A, where Jonathan Pierce sat silent, shoulders square, eyes calm in a way that unsettled. Phones began to rise, tiny flashes blinking in the dim cabin. A young passenger murmured, "This is going online. Just watch." A middle-aged man gave a slight nod, already opening his camera app. Laura Miller swallowed hard. She had lost control of the situation, and she knew it. Only minutes ago, it had been a simple dispute over a seat. Now the cabin had turned into a stage, with dozens of eyes waiting to see who would be humiliated. Then came a figure striding in, steps sharp, presence heavy with false authority. Mark Reynolds, cabin supervisor. A man in his 40s, hair slicked back, suit pressed, carrying himself less like service staff and more like a commander. "Sir," Mark's voice rang out loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, "you need to give up your seat. This is an order." No request, no courtesy, only a command. Jonathan looked up slowly. His voice was even, steady, yet it cut like an arrow. "I have already presented my platinum card. This is the seat assigned to me, and I will remain in it." For a fleeting moment, something uneasy flickered in Mark's eyes, but he quickly recovered, leaned closer to Jonathan, and lowered his voice in a way that somehow carried through the entire cabin. "Perhaps you do not understand how we operate. We prioritize certain clients. Not everyone qualifies." The last words landed like stones. A passenger in the back hissed, "Oh my God! Did he just say that?" Jonathan did not react with anger. He simply met Mark's gaze, calm to the point of chilling. "I understand perfectly, and I repeat, I will not leave this seat." The cabin froze. Breaths caught, keyboards clicked, whispers rippled. Someone muttered, "This man's got real courage." Catherine Doyle, leaning against a nearby seat, exhaled with theatrical frustration. She flicked her wrist to show off her watch and raised her voice. "This is absurd. I have an important meeting after landing. Who will take responsibility if I'm delayed?" A wave of murmurs followed. "She's right. Why not let her sit? That man doesn't look like first class anyway." Laura's eyes darted toward Catherine, then Mark. In her pocket, the money still burned like fire. She bit her lip. guilt gnawing at her, but fear pressing harder. Mark drew a deep breath, then leaned in again, his words clipped, deliberate. "Mr. Pierce, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The choice is yours." The threat hung in the air like a blade at his throat. Jonathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, serene. "I choose the most direct way. I'm not going anywhere." 6 words. Simple, but powerful enough to make the entire cabin erupt. Mark straightened, his face flushed crimson. He spun on his heel and stormed toward the front of the cabin, his frustration plain in every hurried stride. Jonathan turned back to his tablet. His finger slid across the screen as though nothing had happened, but inside his heart pounded, each beat a reminder. This is more than a seat. This is a challenge. The atmosphere shifted. Some eyes on Jonathan no longer carried doubt, but quiet admiration. They saw in him not a man forced into submission, but a wall of resolve standing firm against the storm. No one there yet knew the real confrontation had only just begun. And the next move would not merely be about a single seat. It would drag the entire future of Skylink Airlines into the fight. 5 minutes later, the sound of the cockpit door snapping open cut through the cabin. Out stepped Captain Edward Collins, a seasoned man with a weathered face and eyes cold as steel. He moved down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps, the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding hundreds of lives in the sky. Behind him trailed Mark Reynolds and flight attendant Laura Miller, their faces taut with tension. The entire cabin held its breath. No one thought this was just a matter of a seat anymore. At this moment, it felt like a courtroom in miniature, the full weight of the airline bearing down on one passenger. Collins stopped before seat 2A, his voice deep, steady, and grave. "Sir, I understand there is a situation here. My crew has the authority to reassign seats to ensure the comfort and convenience of our passengers." Jonathan looked up. 4 pairs of eyes bore into him. The captain's, Mark's, Laura's, and Catherine Doyle's, who stood just behind them, deliberately projecting impatience. The imbalance of power was stark. They stood. He sat. Yet his voice was calm, unwavering. "Captain, I have a platinum card, a valid ticket, and this seat is assigned to me. I chose it for the space to work. There is no policy that requires me to give it up simply because someone else demands it." Silence fell. Every passenger heard him clearly. Mark's lips curled into a thin smile, half smirk, half threat. "If you do not comply, we will have to remove you from this flight." Jonathan raised his brow, for the first time showing a trace of surprise. "You're saying I'll be taken off this flight simply because I refuse to give up the seat I lawfully purchased?" The silence grew heavier, thick as lead. Somewhere behind, a passenger whispered, "Unbelievable." Before Collins could reply, Catherine interjected, her voice high and theatrical. "This is outrageous. I will miss a critical meeting. I have never been treated like this." She shot Jonathan a look, the shadow of a triumphant smile flickering across her lips. Captain Collins exhaled sharply, his tone harder now. "This is your final warning. If you do not cooperate, we will call airport security." Yet in the cabin, a few people held their breath. Others snapped pictures furiously. Jonathan lowered his hand to his pocket, slowly pulled out his phone, and opened the camera. He raised it level with his chest, The lens pointed squarely at the three standing before him. "I need to record this," he said, his voice clear, each word cutting like ice. "I am being threatened with removal from this flight, despite occupying my assigned valid seat." Mark jolted, his face flickering with alarm. He stepped forward, hand reaching for the phone. "Filming is not permitted on the plane." Jonathan angled slightly away, avoiding the grasp, his reply steady. "There is no federal law against recording, unless it interferes with the crew. I am recording for my own safety." A ripple of astonishment ran through the cabin. A woman whispered, "He's so calm." Nothing like what they wanted. Mark pulled his hand back, his face burning red. Collins gripped the brim of his cap, frustration flashing. Laura looked down, her hands clenched tight, the cash in her pocket searing against her skin. Jonathan sat upright, gaze unwavering. "You can call security, but remember, everything is being recorded." The words rang out, short but heavy, like a hammer striking steel. And just then, the cabin shook with the heavy thud of boots on the floor. 2 airport security officers appeared at the door, striding forward with purpose, eyes locked on Jonathan. The cabin went deathly still. Even the hum of the engines seemed to vanish. Everyone knew the next moment would be the spark that could set fire to the reputation of the entire airline. The footsteps of the 2 security officers echoed like war drums, pulling every eye toward the front of the cabin. The taller man, his face stern, spoke first. "Sir, we have been called to escort you off this flight." His voice was booming, cold as a blade slicing through the already suffocating air. Jonathan lifted his head, gave a slight nod, and replied in a calm but resonant tone. "Please tell me, what regulation have I violated? My ticket is valid, here is my platinum card, and I am seated in the seat assigned to me." The 2 officers hesitated, glancing at each other. It was clear they too recognized the absurdity. But Collins stood just behind them, his eyes issuing silent commands, while Mark Reynolds folded his arms, a smug smile curling at his lips. "Sir," the second officer said, carefully avoiding Jonathan's gaze, "please collect your belongings and come with us. This is a directive from the flight crew." A murmur spread through the cabin. A young woman, her phone still recording, whispered, "He didn't do anything wrong." An older man shook his head, his voice tight with anger. "This is blatant injustice." Jonathan closed his tablet, slid it carefully into his leather bag, and rose to his feet. His movements were unhurried, every gesture radiating an uncanny calm. His shoulders were straight, his steps steady, as though he were the one in control. Catherine Doyle watched with a thin smile. As Jonathan passed, she let out a whisper, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Back where he belongs. He never deserved that seat." Some passengers frowned, one muttering under his breath, "She's despicable." But Catherine didn't care. She believed money and status paved her way, and Jonathan was nothing but an intruder removed. Jonathan walked past Mark. For an instant their eyes locked. His look was calm but deep, carrying an unspoken warning. "Everything you've done is being recorded, and soon you will pay." As he neared the door, something unexpected happened. Catherine, believing no one noticed, slipped another wad of cash into Mark's vest pocket. Her voice hissed low. "Thank you for maintaining standards, First class must remain pure. What she didn't know was that at least 3 phones had captured the entire act. A greedy whisper, a hand passing money, every detail preserved as undeniable proof. Jonathan stepped off the plane, the 2 security officers behind him. His shoulders did not slump. On the contrary, each step he took carved deeper into the false face of Skylink Airlines. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere unraveled. Passengers whispered, shook their heads. Some even wept. They hadn't just witnessed a man being forced from his seat. They had seen the raw truth, favoritism, bribery, and a rotten system exposed in broad daylight. And they did not know that the man who had just walked away was in fact the airline's largest shareholder, holding the power to make Skylink tremble. A storm was gathering, and it would not stop on the runway. The airplane door closed behind Jonathan Pierce, leaving an entire first-class cabin boiling like water on the verge of spilling over. 2 security officers escorted him down the stairs, each step heavy, the sound of boots striking concrete echoing across the empty runway. The afternoon sky was grey, the cold wind biting his face. But inside Jonathan, a hidden fire was igniting. He did not bow his head. His shoulders were square, his eyes fixed forward. With every step, there was a strange calm, the kind that only comes from a man who knows he holds more power than those who had just humiliated him. The officers stopped at the gate, signaling to him, "Sir, please collect your belongings. We will escort you outside." Jonathan turned, his voice low and steady, resonating with clarity. "Can you tell me exactly why I am being removed from this flight?" The 2 men exchanged glances, hesitation flickering between them. The taller one spoke, forcing his voice to stay firm. "The report from the crew states that you were causing a disturbance." "A disturbance?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Have either of you seen me do anything other than sit quietly in the seat assigned to me?" The question shot like an arrow. Neither answered. The second officer turned his face away, avoiding his gaze. Jonathan did not shout. Instead, he calmly lifted his phone, his tone firm but measured. "Send the full report to Elena. Call the legal and PR teams immediately. I am being removed from Skylink Airlines in what can only be described as public discrimination. And I have proof." His voice carried evenly, recorded directly into the device. A live testimony. Just as he slipped the phone back into his jacket, a voice called softly behind him. "Wait!" Jonathan turned. A young woman, slight and nervous, her hand trembling as she clutched her phone, rushed toward him. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with determination. I recorded everything," she said, her voice catching. From the moment the flight attendant arrived, to Catherine Doyle handing over money, all of it. "I couldn't just sit there. This is the evidence you need." She held the screen toward Jonathan. On it, clear footage showed every detail. Laura Miller taking the cash, Mark Reynolds pocketing another bribe, and Catherine whispering her vile words. Jonathan studied it closely. For the first time since the ordeal began, warmth flickered in his eyes. He nodded lightly. "Thank you. You didn't just help me. You helped expose a corrupt system." The young woman bit her lip, her hands shaking as she saved the file and sent it to his number. "If needed, I will testify. I can't stay silent after what I saw." "What's your name?" Jonathan asked. "Emily. she replied, her voice small but steady. Jonathan saved her contact, gently squeezing her hand. "Thank you, Emily. You've shown more courage than many adults on that flight." As she walked away, Jonathan opened his phone again, launching the secure app that linked directly to Next Wave's headquarters. Within seconds, the face of Elena Brooks, COO and his closest ally, appeared on the screen. "Jonathan, what happened? PR has already picked it up. Social media is exploding." Jonathan uploaded Emily's video into the feed. "Here, the proof. This wasn't just discrimination. They took bribes in front of dozens of witnesses." Elena inhaled sharply, her eyes widening. "My God, do you realize this could rip Skylink in two? The entire industry is watching." "Exactly," Jonathan nodded. "This is our chance to force them into the light. Assemble the legal team. Prepare an emergency press conference. I want every file backed up on 10 separate servers. And Elena." He paused, his voice dropping, cold as steel. "Notify Skylink's board of directors. As the largest shareholder, I am convening an emergency meeting. Tonight." Elena's eyes gleamed with wordless conviction. "I'll handle it. Jonathan, are you all right?" He allowed himself the faintest smile, sharp as a blade. "I'm fine. But Skylink isn't." The call ended. He slipped the phone away, drawing in a deep breath. Across the terminal, passengers murmured, some already recognizing his face from Forbes covers, the man hailed as the AI pioneer of the century. News spread fast, like fire on dry grass. The two security officers, who had remained silent, finally spoke, their voices low. "Mr. Pierce, we're sorry. The report doesn't match what we saw. You did nothing disruptive. We were used." Jonathan turned, his eyes not angry but heavy with sorrow. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But remember this: silence in the face of injustice is still complicity." Both men lowered their heads in shame. Jonathan stepped out of the terminal, the wind whipping at his suit jacket. In his hand, his phone buzzed non-stop with notifications from social media. The hashtag @Justice42A climbing. Thousands of shares every minute. He stopped, staring into the vast expanse of the airport, his eyes burning with resolve. Skylink had chosen the wrong opponent. They thought forcing him out of seat 2A was the end. In truth, it was only the beginning of a storm that would tear away their mask of decency. In that moment, Jonathan knew. The game of power had officially begun. The glass skyscraper of Skylink Airlines gleamed in the glow of sunset, but inside, the atmosphere was as heavy as a storm about to break. On the top floor, in the CEO's office, phones rang endlessly. Hurried footsteps echoed down the halls, and the pale, frantic faces of assistants made the corridor feel like an emergency ward. Richard Howard, CEO of Skylink, sat behind a massive walnut desk. His fists were clenched, eyes fixed on the large wall screen. The video played on a loop from multiple angles. Laura Miller with her forced smile, Catherine Doyle sliding a wad of cash into a pocket, Mark Reynolds lowering his head as he accepted, that half smile of collusion, and finally Jonathan Pierce being escorted off the plane. Calm, yet defiant. Every time the clip ended, The room sank into suffocating silence. "How many views?" Richard growled. The PR director, face ashen, answered, "Over 2.3 million in just 3 hours, sir. The hashtag Justice42A is trending worldwide. Every major outlet, CNN, BBC, Reuters, they're all covering it." Another assistant added nervously, "Shares are already down 9%. Analysts predict if we don't act immediately, we could lose 25% of market value within 48 hours. Richard closed his eyes, exhaling heavily. He had dealt with crises before, but never like this. This was not a service mishap. This was a public scandal of discrimination, caught on camera, spreading across the globe. The PR director hesitated, voice shaking. "Sir, there's something even more serious." Richard opened his eyes, pupils sharp as drills. "Say it." The man removed from the plane was Jonathan Pierce. The room fell into stunned silence. The name dropped like a bomb. "Say that again," Richard whispered. "Jonathan Pierce, founder of Next Wave Technologies. He is Skylink's largest shareholder. We have been negotiating with his company for a $55 million partnership, and according to internal records, Next Wave has acquired over 26% of Skylink's shares over the past 2 years. A strangled gasp escaped one executive. Faces drained of color, as if the floor had just given way beneath them. Richard shot to his feet, his chair slamming into the wall. "God Almighty," he muttered, eyes darting as if searching for a non-existent escape. The CFO spoke, voice breaking. "If Pierce dumps his shares now, Skylink collapses. We don't just lose the tech deal. The market will see it as a sell-off signal." Phones rang again. An assistant rushed in, face ghostly white. "Sir, Mr. Pierce's office is on the line. He wants to speak directly, immediately." The tension thickened. Every eye turned to Richard. He swallowed hard, straightened his tie, and picked up the phone. "Mr. Pierce." Richard's voice trembled between tension and regret. On the other end, Jonathan's voice rang out. Steady, clear, every word sharp as a blade. "Good evening, Mr. Howard. I trust you've seen the video." "Yes, and allow me to." "I don't want apologies," Jonathan cut in, his tone calm but icy. "What I want is action, and it begins with an emergency shareholders meeting. Tonight." Sweat prickled at the back of Richard's neck. He wanted to protest, to delay, but Jonathan pressed on, giving him no opening. "I hold over 1/4 of Skylink's shares. With allied partners, I have enough to call and pass resolutions. If you refuse to cooperate, I will liquidate every share by tomorrow morning. Imagine what that will do to Skylink." The executives around the table sat frozen. Some turned away. Others groaned under their breath. They all knew. One decision from Jonathan could shatter the MER they clung to in an instant. Richard's voice wavered. "Mr. Pierce, we will do whatever you ask." Jonathan was silent for a few seconds. Then his voice returned, calm yet hammer-heavy. "Good. Prepare the boardroom. I will arrive with my team. And remember, this is no longer about one seat in first class. This is about the value of the entire company." The line went dead. The beeping tone echoed in the room, and no one dared breathe. Richard lowered the phone, sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked around at the silent board members and whispered, "We threw out the wrong man, and he is the one who can end Skylink with a flick of his finger. That night, Skylink Airlines' largest boardroom blazed with light. Towering glass walls reflected the tense faces of dozens of shareholders and executives. The room buzzed with whispers, scraping chairs, and hurried breaths, sounding like an orchestra of chaos. The doors opened. The moment Jonathan Pierce stepped inside, silence fell as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He still wore the same suit from the flight, creased at the hem, yet he stood tall, his eyes burning with resolve. At his side were Eleanor Brooks, COO of Next Wave, along with 2 attorneys and the communications director. They entered like a battle unit, ready for war. Every conversation died. Every gaze followed, caught between shame and fear. Jonathan set his briefcase on the table, not sitting right away. His eyes swept the room, and under that gaze, people lowered their heads as if their masks had been stripped away. Then he spoke, his voice low but resonant. Tonight, we are not here to talk about profits. Tonight, we are here to talk about ethics, and I want to begin with a video. Elena gave the signal. The massive screen lit up, playing the clip from multiple angles. Catherine Doyle's voice hissed, "That is my seat." Laura Miller's voice dropped into a syrupy pretense, the image of Catherine sliding money into Laura's pocket. Then Mark Reynolds leaning in, accepting another wad of cash with the muttered words, "First class has standards." The sound in the room was as heavy as hammer blows. When the video ended, no one dared to speak. Some older directors lowered their heads, rubbing their temples. Others avoided Jonathan's eyes. He shattered the silence. "This was not an accident. This is rot in the culture, and I will not allow this company to continue under such a mask of deceit." Richard Howard, CEO of Skylink, tried to find his voice. "Mr. Pierce, on behalf of the company, I don't want apologies." Jonathan cut him off, his tone cold as steel. "I want change, and I have 2 demands." He raised 2 fingers, his gaze sweeping the room. First, everyone directly involved in this incident, Laura Miller, Mark Reynolds, Captain Edward Collins, must be terminated immediately. No suspension, no drawn-out investigation. Immediate dismissal. A murmur broke out. The HR director stammered, "Mr. Pierce, we have to comply with labor laws, the unions." Jonathan slammed his hand down on the table, the sound booming. "Do not make excuses. I am speaking about moral responsibility. If you want me to remain, the decision must be absolute." He lowered his hand, his voice deeper. "Second, I am withdrawing the $55 million partnership deal. Next Wave will not sign, will not implement its system for Skylink until you prove this culture has changed. If not, I will liquidate every share I own, and you know the consequences." His words fell like a hammer against the table. The tension strangled the air. Richard Howard's face went pale, his hands trembling against the chair. The CFO whispered, "If he dumps his shares, the market will crash. We will lose at least 30% of our value tomorrow." Just then, the door burst open. An analyst rushed in, gasping for breath, holding up a tablet. "Skylink stock is already down 12%. Investors are in panic. If we do not act now, we will lose everything." Every eye turned to Jonathan. He sat still, composed, his hands clasped on the table. "You have two choices," he said slowly, his voice echoing through the wide room. "Act now and prove to the world Skylink can change. Or let me walk out and watch this company collapse under its own weight." Silence stretched for a few more seconds, then erupted into chaos. Directors turned to one another, faces stricken. Richard Howard bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "We have no other choice." And so that very night, Skylink Airlines faced the harshest verdict in its history. A verdict delivered by the very man they once forced out of Seat 2A. The shareholders' meeting dissolved into chaos. The decision had been passed with unprecedented speed. Within an hour, Skylink's HR department received orders to prepare the files. There was no time for delay, no reason for excuses. 3 names were read out with clarity: Mark Reynolds, Laura Miller, Edward Collins. On the floor below, in a small glass-walled conference room, the air was so thick it was hard to breathe. Mark sat with his elbows pressed into the table, his face flushed with rage. Laura sat beside him, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her skin. Edward Collins, the veteran captain, stayed silent, his eyes heavy with the exhaustion of a man who had aged a decade in a single day. The door swung open. The HR director entered with 2 attorneys and 2 security officers. Her voice was cold, stripped of any emotion. "I will be direct. After reviewing the undeniable evidence, Skylink Airlines has decided to terminate the employment of all 3 of you, effective immediately." A thick folder was dropped onto the table. 3 termination notices, 3 contracts slashed with red lines. Laura broke into sobs, her voice trembling. "Please give me another chance. I was only following orders. I didn't mean to." The HR director did not blink. "Ms. Miller, the evidence clearly shows you accepting a bribe. You can explain it to your attorney, but to Skylink, the matter is already clear." Collins closed his eyes briefly, letting out a hollow sigh. "I relied on the judgment of my subordinates. I did not see the situation unfold from the start." "You were the captain," the HR director replied, her tone like steel. "The final responsibility was yours, and you remained silent while a passenger was unlawfully forced out." Mark shot to his feet, slamming a fist against the table. "You're all insane. I followed protocol." He was disruptive. I was protecting the airline's image. But instantly, one of the attorneys spun a laptop around to face him. The video played Catherine Doyle sliding a wad of cash into Mark's pocket with her cutting words, "First class has standards." Mark's face drained of color. The room fell silent, except for the video replaying again and again. Each time the scene appeared, his defense collapsed further under the weight of its own lie. "That is proof," the HR director said, her voice merciless. "Mr. Reynolds, you turned this airline into a black market inside the cabin. There is nothing left to justify." Mark dropped into his chair, his eyes vacant. In an instant, the arrogance and authority he once wielded in the cabin vanished, leaving only the hollow shell of a defeated man. The HR director closed the folder and gave a signal. The 2 security officers stepped forward, their gazes firm. "Please stand. You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings. Afterward, your access cards will be deactivated." Laura sobbed uncontrollably, muttering through her tears, "I only wanted to pay my mortgage. I only wanted to keep my job." Collins kept his head down, his steps heavy, dragging along with them the weight of 30 years in the cockpit. Mark struggled, shouting, but his cries were swallowed by the cold stares of lawyers and guards. The three of them walked out, heads bowed. That image of public humiliation was a mirror of the moment Jonathan Pierce was dragged off the plane just hours earlier. Except Jonathan had walked with pride, and they left in disgrace. Upstairs, Jonathan sat in the main boardroom, watching through the glass wall as the three figures disappeared down the corridor. He did not smile, he did not gloat. His eyes held only stern resolve, because he knew this was not the end. This was only the surface being scraped off a sickness rooted deep within. When the door opened, Eleanor Brooks stepped in with a crisp report. "The terminations are complete. All cabin crew involved have been removed from Skylink's system. The news will spread within minutes." Jonathan nodded, his voice steady and commanding. "Good. The next step, we will not just deal with 3 individuals. We will deal with the culture itself. This entire company must relearn from the ground up what fairness and respect mean." The executives in the room lowered their heads. They understood. What was unfolding was no longer just a scandal. It was a full-scale surgery on Skylink Airlines, and Jonathan Pierce was the surgeon holding the scalpel. The next morning, the Grand Hall of Skylink Airlines was packed. More than 1,000 employees crowded in, from flight attendants, technicians, and ground staff to middle managers. The atmosphere was tense, like Judgment Day. People whispered, eyes red from sleepless nights, from fear, from not knowing what their future would be. On stage, Richard Howard, CEO of Skylink, stood beside Jonathan Pierce. That image alone was enough to shake the entire company. On one knolled, the man who had led the airline for 10 years. On the other, the man who just yesterday had been thrown out of seat 2A in humiliation by that very same company. Now the two of them stood before the entire workforce, but only one of them held the true power. Richard spoke first, his voice hoarse. "Yesterday, Skylink Airlines failed, not only in service but in morality. A passenger was humiliated on one of our flights, in front of dozens of witnesses, in front of the eyes of the world. That is a stain we cannot deny." He paused, drew in a deep breath, then stepped aside. "And today, the one who will speak to you is Jonathan Pierce." The hall rippled with shock, confused looks, murmurs spreading. "It's him. It's really him." Jonathan stepped forward to the podium, tall and upright, his gaze sweeping over the sea of people. He carried no notes. He carried only his voice, a voice that rang out with steady power, each word striking like a hammer into the hearts of those listening. "Yesterday, I was forced from my rightful seat. I was treated as though I was unworthy, simply because of my skin color and the presence of another. But I am not here to demand justice for myself. I am here to demand justice for everyone who has ever been ignored, diminished, or cast aside within this company." A wave of silence washed through the hall. Someone lowered their head. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Jonathan continued, his voice stronger. "From this moment forward, Skylink will not be the same. Every employee, from pilots to cabin cleaners, from managers to the board of directors, all of you will participate in anti-bias training designed and led directly by Next Wave Technologies. This will not be a token session. This will be an intensive program built on real-world simulations, forcing us to confront the prejudice within our own hearts. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. No one is exempt. No one is allowed to stand aside. From this moment on, respect and fairness are not optional. They are the conditions for Skylink's survival. The murmurs dissolved into absolute silence, every eye fixed on him. Richard stepped forward, his voice trembling but resolute. And to prove we are serious, I, as CEO, declare that Skylink Airlines will suspend all operations for the next 48 hours. Every flight will be cancelled or delayed. During those 48 hours, every employee will be required to undergo training. This will be a massive financial sacrifice, but if we do not do this, we will lose everything. The hall erupted in shock. A young flight attendant covered her mouth. A mechanic shook his head in disbelief. Suspending operations meant losses of tens of millions of dollars. But at the same time, many realized this was proof Skylink had no more room to run. Jonathan raised his hand, signaling the hall to quiet. His voice softened, but cut even deeper. You may think I am doing this for revenge. No. If I wanted revenge, I would have sold off my shares last night and let Skylink collapse. But I do not want destruction. I want reform. I want a new Skylink, one where no one has to fear being belittled because of their background, their skin color, or their status. The hall fell into heavy silence. Then from the middle rows, a technician stood and clapped. The sound echoed awkwardly at first, then spread, then burst into a wave of applause, sweeping through the hall. Many stood, eyes wet with emotion. Jonathan did not smile. He only nodded slightly. He knew. This was not victory. This was only the beginning of a painful reconstruction. But at least he had forced thousands of people to confront the truth and begin to believe in a different future. As he stepped away from the podium, Jonathan glanced back. He looked at the sea of people applauding, at Richard Howard bowing his head low in belated remorse. Inside him, a thought rang clear. Seat 2A was just a chair, but fairness is the journey of my life, and today it begins here, in the very place that once tried to humiliate me. In the world of aviation, a seat can be treated as a privilege. But this story proved that fairness is not a privilege. It is a fundamental human right. Jonathan Pierce turned humiliation into opportunity, transforming a moment of injustice into a fire that forced an entire corporation to change. The lesson is not only for Skylink Airlines. It is for all of us. Every disdainful glance, every moment of silence in the face of injustice contributes to sustaining a distorted system. But when just one person dares to stand up, the whole world can be changed. If you have ever witnessed injustice, what would you do? Stay silent and turn away, or dare to speak up, like Jonathan? If you believe that respect should be the default, not a privilege, then hit like to spread this story. Do not forget to subscribe to join us on the journeys ahead, where truth is revealed and justice is never forgotten. And leave a comment with just one word: justice, as a reminder that no matter who you are, You deserve to be respected.